Hello students. Now in this lesson we are going to take in detail the components of an ecosystem. We did discuss what were the levels under which ecology is studied. So ecosystem was the one basic unit under which we study ecology, inside which the basic unit of study of ecosystem was further an organism. So now we are going to take into account the few more terms which are related to it, and entire lesson would be dedicated to the abiotic factors which are part of the environment of an organism. So ecosystem is the study of how the biotic community is interacting with the environment basically. So we need to know what is an environment. Environment, when we talk about it, is the sum total of biotic and abiotic influences on an organism or on a population of organisms. So when we talk about biotic components, they would be the living populations around the organism or the population, given population that we are studying, and the abiotic components would include the non-living components that would have the influence on the survival of an organism. So that forms the environment, and entire ecology is basically dealing with how this environment influences the survival of a particular population, how does it adapt to it, and what are the consequences of those adaptations. So we have environment, which is the influence, which includes both biotic and abiotic influences for an organism in the given, supposedly this is an organism, this is the place where it resides, so this place would have biotic components as well as abiotic components. So this organism, in order to survive in this region, would have to interact with these, because without interaction it is not possible for any organism. In some or other way it has to interact for, if not anything else, for food at least. So there would be an interaction with those influences that comes under the environment. Now this organism happens to be the unit, and the remaining part which would have the influence on the survival of this organism would form the environment. Then there is a very gross term that we discussed earlier also, that what happens to be a habitat. Habitat is not that a strong term as in terms of ecology, but if we have to understand the physical features, the conspicuous physical features. Now you must be knowing what is conspicuous physical feature. It is that feature that we see. If we are talking about a habitat of, supposedly you're talking about habitat of a fish, so the conspicuous features that would be there, that would be the dominant plant and animal species which would be present in the environment. Please pay attention. The plant and animal species which would be quite visible, the dominant ones, supposedly I am talking about a river population. So I know that there, not river, mangrove would be a better option. If I am talking about a mangrove habitat, I am talking about a mangrove plant. So you know that there would be dominant plant and animal species, that there would be all those plants and animals which know how to survive in marshy areas. That would contribute to the habitat of that organism. And then we have ecological niche. What is a niche? Niche is basically that tolerance, the range of conditions that an organism can tolerate. Now those conditions would include again the biotic communities which would be around it, and the abiotic influences which would be present. So niche happens to be the range in which the organism has enabled its best possible survival. That means it can tolerate that much range. If we talk about ourselves, we can tolerate the Arctic climate as well, and we can tolerate the desert climate as well. So we have a huge ecological niche, that is the tolerance range that an organism has learned, and it comprises the environment in which it survives, and the nearest being the habitat. I hope it is clear. These three terms are clear, because whenever we would refer these terms, the point should be very clear what part we are referring to. So in environment, we have biotic components which we discussed earlier. Biotic, we are talking about living thing. That means we would be talking about the organism basically. The organism would form the population. You can see the previous lecture for understanding what the biotic components are for an ecosystem. Now we need to understand what are the abiotic components. You have two types of components. Biotic we discussed, abiotic we are going to discuss now. Abiotic components are non-living components. Means they would be devoid of life. That is the simplest way I can explain abiotic. But when we have to understand it from ecosystem point of view, there are 4 different components which are abiotic, and they contribute and influence an organism's survival. That means we are discussing environment over here. So we will discuss those components which are going to influence the organism basically. First one happens to be the temperature for that given region. Then second is water, because maximum of life forms are found in water only. So we consider this as an important abiotic factor. Light certainly would be the most important one, because ultimate source of food on entire earth is photosynthesis only. So light is important, and soil also contributes to the abiotic influences for an organism. When I'm talking about soil over here, you might have a doubt in your mind that how does soil affect us? How does soil affect those organisms which are not dependent on soil directly? So somehow every organism is indirectly dependent on soil. That's why it makes an important abiotic component. Now we're going to take each of the component one by one, but before that you need to understand the term climate. You might be aware that there is a difference between climate and weather. You know, weather is a short duration climate. Climate plays an important role. Climate is sum total of all the weather activities which are going for a given place. So what we are concerned more about over here is microclimate, which is the immediate climatic condition for an organism where it is surviving. This microclimate and basic climate is going to form the abiotic components. Now you might be aware that in Earth we have various climatic zones. You might have heard that there were various climatic zones. We have torrid zone, we have temperate zone, we have tropical region. So somehow your knowledge of geography is going to play an important role over here. You know, Earth is a round planet, very basic, very simple. We have an equatorial region which is right in the middle of the earth, and we have the ultimate source of energy that happens to be sun. So this sunlight comes in the form of rays. The rays, how they are falling in the particular region, that has given rise to various climatic zones. You might have heard, or you might be very clear with it. I need not to repeat though, but still I am, that this is tropic zone. Simplest one, just to give you an idea that what is the role of climate, and this is the most gross thing I could draw to make you understand that what is basically climate. Climate is the environment that an organism is having, immediate environment, and the smallest unit being the microclimate. Now how this climate is influenced, that has a role of Earth's geography in it, that we have tropical regions, we do have temperate regions as well, which is intermediate between tropic and Arctic. So this is the division of regions on Earth, and we have different climates over here. But though microclimate would be varying from place to place, in fact from every place, but if gross way we have to understand, we have Arctic, temperate, tropic, and both the Arctic regions, then we have temperate regions, and all this depends on how the sun rays are falling on Earth. This region receives maximum sunlight, so it is having maximum of ecosystems which are interacting. So if somebody has to study ecology, this place would be heaven for him to understand, him or her to understand the ecological interactions. This place has a different type of climate where you have much cold and a short duration hot period, and Arctic region, you might be aware that most of the time this is going to be covered with snow, and there would be very low temperature over here. So this differentiation of the climate basically is depending on the temperature which is prevalent in the given area, and temperature forms the important abiotic component. Now this region receives maximum sunlight. If there is maximum sunlight, there is no temperature variation, much of temperature variation. The optimum temperature for almost all living organisms happen to be 25 degrees Celsius, which is being provided in this region. So this region will have maximum biodiversity and maximum productivity. When we talk about maximum productivity, that means this region would have lot many species in comparison to this region. When there are are more species, there would be more communities. When there are more communities, there would be more interactions, and hence this region would have most of the ecosystems. So the abiotic component of temperature, that is the ambient temperature in which an organism is going to survive, that has a very important role to play in the survival of an organism. Then we have water. 70% of earth is water. 70% of earth is water, and maximum life forms are found in water. If you have to compare terrestrial and aquatic life forms, you would have lot many more in comparison with those in water as compared to those on land. So water plays an important role. When I talk about water, I am considering salinity basically. Salinity, which divides water sources into water habitats into two different types, one being fresh water and other being marine water. So you know that water is the place where life first originated. So water also has an important role to play in the environment of an organism. Then we have light. In the beginning, I told you sun is the ultimate source of energy, so I need not to tell you what would be the importance of light, because plants would use sunlight only for making their food, and every other life form would be dependent on photosynthetic plants for obtaining energy. So light has also an important role to play. And soil is the reservoir of all the minerals. Every mineral that we have in our body, that would come from soil, and who would take it up? Plants would take it up. So we would be dependent on plants for taking those minerals, and soil happens to be the reservoir of all the minerals. So these are the four basic factors which are very important in understanding that how the organism is going to interact with the environment. One by one we are going to take each abiotic factor and study how a given ecosystem is going to be influenced by it, or if not an ecosystem, how an organism would try to acclimatize to this particular abiotic condition. Now when I am saying acclimatize or survive in best possible way, I am taking into term adaptation. See, living thing can change. A living organism, supposedly you have a lizard in your room, so you would shoo it and it would go from there. That can happen, but you cannot change the temperature. Of course, you can change the temperature by thermostats and all, but you cannot change the temperature of entire city. You don't have that much capability, nor does any organism have. So when we talk about abiotic factors, you are helpless basically. Every organism is helpless. All they can do is they can adapt to this temperature. They cannot change the abiotic factor. All they can do is they can adapt to that biotic factor. How? By bringing the change inside their own body, or by changing their behavior basically. Suppose you have to go out in sun every day, so all you can do to avoid that sun heat is that you can change the time, or you can take a long umbrella along with you, but you cannot change the sun basically, because that thing is a given. It is a given condition that you cannot change. So for that we have adaptations, and when we talk about adaptations, we need to understand that what each of these abiotic factor, how variable each abiotic factor can get in the environment. If I am talking about temperature, right now we discussed that there would be a tropic temperature, there would be a temperate temperature, and there would be arctic temperature. So these temperatures are temperature has a very important role in enzyme action of every organism. So every organism has a best possible temperature entity under which it is going to perform in the best way. So this enzymatic activity with slight change in the temperature can affect organisms' output basically. So we are going to see that all the organisms which are best suited for a given environment have adjusted in such a way so that their enzymatic activity does not decline, and they are giving their best productivity. All the terms, these productivity and output, these are a study of ecosystem only, but for now you need to understand that this temperature influences the productivity of an organism. So in order to increase or not let that productivity decline, that organism would undergo some sort of adaptation. So we have, when the temperature increases, it is going to decline the enzymatic activity. If it increases, then also it is going to do the same. So basically we have two types of organisms when we talk about temperature. One is conformers and second is regulators. See, as I have written temperature in the first position. So this is the most important abiotic factor. The organisms which are able to regulate their internal temperature, that it hardly matters whatever the temperature is. You know your body has 37 degrees Celsius as your body temperature. Whatever the temperature outside may be, that temperature is not going to change. If there is a slight change, that we call as fever. So we are basically regulators. We know how to maintain the body temperature, and that is known as homeostasis. Now see how each and every organism has adapted to this condition. Do you see any insect or snake in cold conditions? No, you would never find it. You won't find snakes in Arctic region. Why? Because they do not know how to do homeostasis. So they are conformers. Whatever the outside condition may be, they will be according to that only. Supposedly the temperature increases, you would not find them. Supposedly the temperature decreases, you would not find them in either of the condition. So such organisms are conformers. Why are they conformers? Because they cannot perform homeostasis. What is homeostasis? Homeostasis is the ability of organisms to survive in any condition by maintaining an internal environment inside their body. So there comes environment again, but that is internal term that is being added over here, that we have organisms which are least bothered by what is happening outside, at least in temperature conditions, that they have their internal environment, they would maintain their internal temperature, and conformers will find some adaptive way to avoid those temperatures. You won't find lizards in your home when it is peak winter. You won't find other insects and bees and butterflies when it is peak winter, because they have to hibernate, they have to hide. They cannot maintain inside body temperature inside them, so that they survive in the cold conditions or very hot conditions. So for that reason they are conformers. So you see, basically temperature is having a lot of effect on the organismic behavior. That is why it is an important abiotic factor, and on entire earth you would find different ranges of temperatures, and organisms would have adapted accordingly to that particular temperature. Now we're going to consider water. For that you need to see the next slide. Thank you.